Oops. Like many other classic horror monsters, vampires have had their stories told and retold again and again over the centuries. One of the many forms the vampire has been known to take is that of the lesbian. There's a long and well-documented history of a connection between lesbians and vampires. The modern lesbian vampire trope has origins as early as the 1600s with Countess Elizabeth Bathory, the Hungarian noblewoman that allegedly tortured and killed 650 young girls and bathed in their blood to preserve her youth. That's how she gained the nickname the Blood Countess. The next big appearance of the lesbian vampire trope was in 1872 with Sheridan Le Fanu's Gothic novella Carmilla. The titular Carmilla is a noblewoman that goes from town to town seducing young women, slowly feeding off them until they're weak and die. While there are many similarities on the surface between Carmilla and Countess Bathory, the novella was the first to explicitly link lesbians and vampires, with Carmilla falling in love with all her victims. These two stories went on to inspire multiple adaptations that would borrow and expand upon the lore. The late 60s and early 70s saw a boom of these adaptations. Among the more pivotal movies were The Vampire Lovers and Vampiros Lesbos. Their influential role as lesbian vampire movies makes them good material for a case study of the lesbian vampire. In both films, the vampire's homosexual desires are the source of danger for the protagonists. Their depictions of lesbian desire as being a threat equal to confronting a vampire suggest that, like vampirism, lesbianism is something to be feared. How, then, does this fear arise? Monsters theory states that monsters may be creative projections of societal fears. When viewed through this lens, the horror genre becomes a reflection of cultural anxieties. Different elements of the monster's mythology are emphasized or changed to demonstrate different anxieties. In Monsters, Michael Myers and the Macabre, Justin Huft develops a list of the different meanings various popular monsters may have. Vampires may be used to express fears of contamination, corruption, and deviant sexual identities, to name a few. The lesbian vampire is a representation of anxieties surrounding deviant sexual identities. But the vampires of the 60s and 70s weren't simply metaphors for sexuality. Showing lesbian desire was a part of being the monster. Being a lesbian is then linked to vampirism. Analyzing the treatment of the lesbian vampire subject as a manifestation of societal concerns reveals not only that the lesbian vampire is feared, but why she's feared. The lesbian vampire as a supernatural being can be seen as a disruption in the natural order assumed to be heterosexuality. The 70s saw the rise of more explicit portrayals of queerness due to a combination of the more relaxed censorship restrictions after the 60s and the concurrent rise of relaxed attitudes about sex. It's possible that the lesbian vampire represents the anxiety men have about women's sexuality. Movies like The Vampire Lovers and Vampiros Lesbos can be read as exploring these desires, while titillating audiences in the process. The Vampire Lovers is the first movie in a trilogy made by Hammer Studios after the success of the first one. It's based on Carmilla and keeps many of the main plot points. The movie follows Carmilla, who goes from town to town, seducing young women and sucking their blood. In the opening scene of the movie, we see a crucifix burn a vampire, automatically aligning vampires with evil by placing them in opposition to God. Even sucking blood can be seen as parodying the Christian tradition of drinking the blood of Christ for eternal life, which further demonstrates God's rejection of them. They are also the ones that exhibit the sexual desire more explicitly. Their alignment with evil and their expression of their sexuality associates sexuality with badness. This badness is seen on Carmilla. Her dress is low-cut, her smile mischievous and seductive, and her body too well developed to confirm the youthful, girlish pose she assumes. Meanwhile, her victim Emma looks young, vibrant, innocent. But while Carmilla is the bad, Emma isn't the good. It's really those that stand against Carmilla that are the good. So that would be the men that defeat her and restore order. Emma's ability to so easily be swayed between good and bad makes her morally neutral, showing that she needs the right influence in her life. And Carmilla certainly isn't that influence. Carmilla feeds off of Emma gradually. While a bite on the neck is standard, the bite on the breast is more explicitly sexual and suggests a more intimate relationship between Carmilla and Emma. When Emma becomes weak because of all the blood Carmilla's taking, it's initially seen as weakness from an illness. No one's suspicious of Carmilla. In fact, time and time again, families invite Carmilla into their homes. It's how she's able to continue killing the way she does. No one suspects Carmilla because she doesn't look the part of a killer. Carmilla is conventionally attractive, thin, white, and feminine. Her danger comes from the fact that she looks straight and therefore normal, but isn't. She has strong powers of deception and uses them to lure innocents into her lifestyle. The mix of blood, sex, and the idea of contagion contribute to not only defining the vampire as a deviant being, but lesbians as well. In the scene where Carmilla meets her demise, one of the men that's against her is able to ward her off and protect Emma by using his blade as a crucifix and chanting in Latin. Once again showing that God, aka goodness in this context, rejects her. The relationship between Emma and Carmilla is not just unholy, it's also toxic. Carmilla uses Emma's blood to grow stronger while Emma grows weaker. Carmilla's survival comes at the expense of her lovers. In this way, lesbian desire is portrayed as inherently selfish and hurtful, making the men morally good in being the forces that fight against Carmilla. Vampiros Lesbos takes the power away from the men and turns the battle between good and evil exclusively between the vampire Nadine and her lover Linda. The movie follows Linda as she's seduced by the wealthy Countess Nadine. Linda has a boyfriend that could protect her, but Omar is laughably useless. He arrives late to every major point in the movie. Instead, it's Linda that must save herself from Nadine, if that's what she wants. Linda first sees Nadine at Nadine's performance that I cannot show uncensored. But the performance involves Nadine dancing with a woman who acts like a mannequin while she dresses and undresses herself and the other woman. Linda is in the audience with her boyfriend. She's visibly turned on, and he's visibly annoyed that she's turned on. It presents Nadine as a proper threat to their relationship. Linda's attraction isn't there as entertainment for Omar. It's a real potential threat. But it's also important to note that Nadine, the lesbian vampire, is literally performing in front of an audience of mainly men. So while the lesbian attraction is validated by being seen as more than a joke, she's still literally for men. It's also revealed that Linda had been having dreams about Nadine before she even saw the performance. Nadine is upsetting the natural balance. She's a disturbance in the world. Her form of disturbing Linda's world is seducing her and drinking her blood. Unlike other monsters, the lesbian vampire doesn't seek to destroy her victims, but rather to make them into accomplices. In not denying Nadine, Linda is complicit. Like Carmilla, Nadine also fits the traditional beauty standards for women, making her a danger because she looks straight. In this iteration of the lesbian vampire, her powers of seduction are so strong that we see it causes another woman to have to be institutionalized because it drove her crazy. The anxiety around deviant sexuality is not subtle in the movie at all. Not that anything in these movies were subtle, though. Nadine and Linda's sex scene cuts back and forth between clips of them and clips of animals, namely a scorpion and a butterfly. These evoke feelings of predator and prey and death and equate lesbianism with animalistic imagery, marking it as not human. Nadine likes Linda so much that she wants to convert her, but Linda is able to muster up the courage to reject Nadine and kill her. The movie gives its women more credit by having Linda defeat Nadine herself, but but it does still function to portray the fear and lust that has become associated with the lesbian vampire. Both movies can be read as responses to cultural anxieties. Among these include the fear of women's sexuality and lesbian desires and how these might intersect. Each movie shows the manifestation of the evil lesbian vampire seducing an innocent girl, with the end bringing the vampire's demise and the restoration of the natural order. These movies are ridiculous, they're fun, they look great. I mean, the set designs in Vampiros Lesbos is genuinely beautiful, and the soundtrack is awesome. I definitely recommend them if you're looking for a fun watch. But beyond being fun, I think these movies still have value. In Lesbian Vampires, Goddess Traditions and the Reclamation of Lesbian Herstory, Anne Heath posits that these stories about lesbian vampires, although made for an audience of men, can be reclaimed by lesbians. The Vampire Lovers, Vampiros Lesbos, and movies like them reveal something more in the fear they express. In order to be afraid of something, that something has to have a perceived power. In expressing their fear of women's sexuality, they admit it exists. Similarly, by making the lesbian vampire a subject to be feared, they are inadvertently given power. This paradox creates powerful lesbian vampire characters that at times can be portrayed sympathetically. It's also not entirely clear if the women always revert back to heterosexuality by the end. Weiss assumes they do, but uses the vampire lovers as her case study. She says that Emma returns to her fiancé once Carmilla is killed, but that guy wasn't her fiancé. That was Emma's friend's fiancé, who Carmilla seduced and killed. So it's not entirely clear if Emma goes back to heterosexuality at the end. Maybe she discovered she likes both, who knows? But it's also not clear that the vampire always has to be destroyed by the film's end either. Carmilla was killed, but remember, it's the first of a trilogy. The lesbian vampire lives on. And the same is true for Vampiros Lesbos. The ending can be read as ambiguous. Nadine is killed, but it's never made explicit if Linda ends up turning into a vampire or not. She basically undergoes the process and even drinks Nadine's blood. Her future is as uncertain as Emma's then. If she's a vampire, then the lesbian vampire lives on in the next generation. If she's not a vampire, well, she's still a compelling character for deciding for herself to reject Nadine. Either way, as long as the lesbian vampire keeps getting adapted, she will never truly be destroyed. The lesbian vampire from these low-budget erotic horror movies is an incredibly fun and campy character, but she's also complex. Yes, they're movies obviously made for men, but there's also something kind of great about them. In them, the lesbian vampire can function as a portrayal of cultural anxieties surrounding women and have surprisingly powerful characters. The lesbian vampire is incredibly malleable. She's able to transform into our greatest fears and our greatest desires.